Joseph Webster. An innocent man found himself entangled in a distressing web of murder, false accusations, and corruption that shook the foundation of trust in the justice system. The unsettling series of events began in Nashville, Tennessee, when Leroy Owens was brutally murdered with a cinderblock by two individuals described as black males, ranging from 5 feet 9 inches to 6 feet 1 in height, weighing between 175 to 230 pounds. Despite the elusive nature of the killer, one witness named Tammy Nelson identified 19-year-old Joseph Webster from a police lineup as the perpetrator. Unfortunately, Webster's mostly clean criminal record, marred only by minor drug-related misdemeanors, worked against him. With no other suspects in sight, Webster was arrested and, on March 1, 2006, sentenced to life in prison for the crime. Unfortunately, this disastrous turn of events meant that Webster had to endure an additional 5 years of imprisonment. Then, a shocking revelation came to light when Tammy Nelson made a startling confession. It emerged that she had been offered a deal by the prosecution, enticing her to testify against Webster in exchange for participation in a drug court diversion program, thus avoiding prison. This revelation highlighted instances of judicial corruption and a complete lack of conscience. Despite attempts at appeal and the back-and-forth battles involving DNA evidence, it was not until November of 2020 that Webster's name was finally cleared of all charges. After spending years wrongfully incarcerated, that day of his release undoubtedly marked the pinnacle of happiness for Joseph Webster. His story serves as a painful reminder of the far-reaching consequences of a flawed justice system and the importance of unwavering dedication to the pursuit of truth and justice. The next innocent person is Amanda Knox. On November 1, 2007, the tragic murder of Meredith Kircher in her bedroom sent shockwaves through the small Italian town. As the investigation unfolded, suspicion fell upon Amanda Knox, Kircher's roommate, and her boyfriend, Rafael Solicito. Adding to the complexity, Patrick Lumumba, Amanda's boss at the bar she worked at, was also implicated. Amanda's case took a severe turn when she signed a statement claiming to be at home during the murder, raising eyebrows given the unlikelihood of someone being killed in a shared residence without the other person noticing. As suspect number 1, Amanda found herself in the hot seat. However, the introduction of a new character, Rudy Guede, further complicated the plot. Guede became the police's primary suspect, allegedly connected to Kircher as a romantic interest, or at least someone with whom she was sexually involved. Guede, on the other hand, claimed that Kircher was killed by another man. Lumumba was cleared of any involvement and even planned on suing Amanda. A year later, the prosecution hastily reached conclusions, charging Amanda, Guede, and Solicito with murder. The sentences were handed out without much consideration. Guede received 30 years, while Amanda and Solicito were sentenced to 26 and 25 years respectively. Throughout the trial, Amanda testified about the distressing interrogations she endured, which included physical abuse. In 2010, tearfully, she stood trial, proclaiming her innocence. However, the prosecution's case heavily relied on the testimonies of 2 inmates who claimed Guede had informed them that Amanda was not involved in the murder. The case underwent further twists and turns, leading to a retrial in 2013, where Amanda vehemently asserted her innocence. Finally, in 2015, Amanda and Solicito were cleared of all charges, as inconclusive DNA evidence failed to establish their involvement. In a case riddled with unreliable witnesses and corrupt officials, Lamar Johnson became yet another victim of a grave injustice. The narrative of his wrongful conviction unfolded in 1994 in St. Louis, where the murder of Marcus Boyd took place. Witnesses initially placed Lamar Johnson, Philip Campbell, and James Howard at the scene. However, there existed no physical evidence connecting Johnson to the crime. So how did the witnesses identify Johnson? Astonishingly, it came down to a similarity in their eyes. Yes, an innocent man was condemned to 28 years in prison based on an eye comparison. Fortunately, the other 2 suspects eventually confessed to the murder, leaving Johnson as the sole remaining defendant. It became evident, especially to Circuit Attorney Jim Gardner, that Johnson was innocent, and an arduous legal battle spanning over 2 decades ensued to secure his release. Johnson maintained his innocence throughout. Yet, the conviction was primarily built on the testimony of a confused witness who, in hindsight, recanted and acknowledged that his testimony should never have been used against Johnson. Sadly, the wheels of justice turned agonizingly slowly, and it was only with the introduction of a new law in Missouri in 2021 that Johnson's exoneration and subsequent release came to fruition. Now 49 years old, he had lost the prime years of his life for a crime he had never committed. The injustice he endured stands as a stark reminder of the flaws within the criminal justice system and the devastating consequences that can befall innocent individuals caught up in its web. In 1987, Joyce Watkins found herself embroiled in a harrowing ordeal after spending 2 months living with her family in Nashville, Tennessee. On what seemed like an ordinary and happy day, Joyce noticed that her great-niece, Brandy, had sustained injuries. Concerned, she immediately took Brandy to the hospital, only to be confronted with the shocking and revolting truth. Brandy had suffered head trauma and vaginal injuries. Tragically, Brandy succumbed to her injuries, leaving behind a devastating loss. Based on outdated scientific evidence that linked the injuries to the time Brandy was in the care of Watkins and her partner, Charlie Dunn, the couple's lives took a tragic turn. They were sentenced to life in prison for first-degree murder and aggravated rape, despite vehemently maintaining their innocence throughout the proceedings. The accusations they faced were undeniably heinous, adding to their despair and frustration. However, the painful journey took an even more heart-wrenching turn when Dunn passed away from cancer while wrongfully incarcerated. Not only did he endure the anguish of being wrongfully convicted, but he also tragically died, separated from his loved ones, unable to experience freedom and reunite with his family. Watkins, now 74 years old, faced years of unimaginable loss, having lost her family, friends, and everything she had worked for, including her good-paying job and savings. Nevertheless, justice eventually emerged, as the same science that had led to their imprisonment ultimately paved the way for their release. The methodology used to place the blame on Watkins and Dunn for Brandy's injuries was questioned, leading to a ruling for their release on parole in 2015. However, it took until 2021 for another report to fully vacate their convictions, finally granting Joyce Watkins her freedom. Yet, despite her release, Watkins remained unable to reunite with Charlie Dunn, whose tragic passing had left an irreplaceable void. The anguish and pain endured by Watkins throughout the years served as a stark reminder of the flaws in the criminal justice system and the profound impact wrongful convictions can have on innocent lives.